In this video, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about sources of a competitive advantage. In prior videos, I've talked to you about sort of strategies and the idea of getting a competitive advantage over your competitors, obviously, and making that sustainable in some way so that it makes it hard for them to catch up with you. And we've talked about it at a very high level. But what we want to do now is to sort of dig into that a little bit deeper and maybe provide you some specifics on where companies look to create that advantage. So the first perspective we're going to look at is what's called the value chain perspective. It starts with a simple notion, which is that a company's purpose is to create value, and value is defined as the difference between the price they sell things at and what it costs them to make them, so it's their profit. And generally speaking, if a company can somehow decrease its cost or increase the price at which it sells its product, then it can create value. Now, when I say decrease its cost, just keep in mind that you can decrease the per unit cost if you sell more, and therefore you can take all of your fixed costs and allocate them out to more units. So there's kind of two different takes on that. Now, companies use a number of different activities to basically make and do what they do. And so each of those presents its own opportunities for both value creation and improvement in value. And so the value chain approach really talks about figuring out how much value is currently being created in each of these activities, trying to figure out whether there's an opportunity to create more value in that activity, trying maybe to at least make sure that it's not an activity that just destroys value. And so by doing all of that, kind of working through what things can be done, or maybe what things we're behind on. So you could sometimes compare a particular activity and say, well, we create this much value in this activity, our competitors create more than that. So we're falling behind on that. We need to figure that out. Or we create this much value in an activity. Our competitors are nowhere near as good at that as we are. So that's potentially an advantage for us, and we really want to push that advantage. So just talking about the activities, inbound logistics. Well, first of all, there are two big categories. One's primary activities, the other secondary activities. Primary are the ones that are really tied to making, selling, delivering, servicing the product. So they're sort of specific to that, whereas the secondary ones are the more general activities inside of a business. So the primary activities, you got inbound logistics. So that's basically how do we get the inputs that we need in the right place so that we can put them together and make our output. So that could be material, delivery, inspections, particularly like if you're importing stuff or you've got a quality inspector for something. The receiving docks that you have could also be, if you are a firm that's like a service firm, could be how you keep good quality talent coming in regularly. So really it's searching and recruiting and interviewing and all those sorts of things. In operations is just simply taking all of those things that are being contributed in and combining them to create your output. Now, obviously embedded in that somewhere is the know-how and the equipment and so forth for how to combine the things and create the output. So you got the recipe plus the oven, if you will, or the kitchen. And so this is one of the more common places people look from a value creating activity is to see whether or not they could find a cheaper or more cost effective way to take the inputs and combine them and create the output. Outbound logistics, just what it sounds like. Once you have the product, you got to get it out to the world. And you see a lot with like UPS and FedEx and so forth, talking to people about helping them with their inbound and outbound logistics. Well, so this would be how do we ship it to the place that it needs to be at for customers to buy it. So clearly there's some opportunities there. Just kind of pausing for a second, thinking about these three, a company that comes to mind that really their entire business model sort of what it was built around the idea of creating value through the combination of all of those is Amazon. Amazon basically, if you think about what you know about them now, they really are very much marketing the fact that they're going to get you stuff quick, they're going to use drones, so it's cool, all those sorts of things. So right now what you're hearing about is their outbound logistics. What you don't realize is that what Amazon did initially to really compete against everybody was that they completely rethought this whole issue of inbound logistics and operations. A sort of a traditional supplier would basically be somebody that says, "Oh, I got to go buy my goods from the different suppliers, right? Have them ship them to my warehouses, and then we'll wait till an order comes in and we'll package all those things up and ship them out." And what Amazon has done to a large extent is that they don't really have a whole lot of stuff held in their own warehouses. Rather, what they've done is basically go make arrangements with the original suppliers so that stuff will be shipped out from those suppliers in Amazon packaging directly to you as a customer. That means that you have eliminated one whole trip in terms of logistics. So instead of having it to go from them to Amazon and from Amazon to you, it goes directly from the original manufacturer to you. So you've eliminated that whole step. You've also eliminated all the need for staff and warehouses and all that sort of stuff at Amazon. So you've cut out this huge step, significantly driven down cost by doing that, and that's what really puts you in a different situation than everybody else. Other activities that a company might work on, marketing and sales. Obviously, if they can increase the awareness and the demand for products, then there's value creation there. Kind of comes in two ways. One might be that you're able to charge more, have a higher price for your product. The other is that you might be able to increase the demand for your product. And so if you think about it, that may not help you in terms of the variable costs, but if I've got, say, $1 million worth of fixed costs as well, and I can spread that out between twice as many units because I've sold more, then I've driven down the price per unit, and so I have created value by increasing the demand. There's service, obviously, after the sale, and so this is one that a lot of people have started to pick up on. I know almost to the point to where it's become annoying. There are places, you'll go to Best Buy or whatever else, you'll buy something, and they want to know whether or not you want the service plan. Well, at one time, the idea was that you wouldn't have to pay extra for a service plan. It's just certain products offered service and others didn't. And so that might signal to you that a company has a higher belief in their product if they're actually willing to support it afterwards. Because why would they offer to do that if they know their product has lots of problems and they're going to have to spend a bunch of money supporting you? Now that's just become another revenue source. So it does still count as value creating activities. It's just another thing that you could sell, but it's sort of diminished the perception in people's minds of the service. Now, in addition to those primary activities, you have some secondary activities. We call those secondary because they aren't directly related to the creation and sale of the product. They're more about sort of the overall operation of the company. So that would be procurement. Somebody's got to work out all the contracts and the terms for the stuff to be bought before it can be shipped. And so a lot of times I know of companies, for example, that are large companies and in a position where they are such a large customer that they enter into contracts with people that basically say that if I agree to buy from you and you agree to sell to me at a price, then you also agree that you either won't sell to my competitors or you won't ever sell at a price that's as cheap as the price you're selling to me to anybody else. And so I create some advantage from that. Obviously, there's lots of examples where whether that's information technology or engineering technology, R&D, maybe think about it. Those are kinds of secondary activities that can create value. Human resources, if you do a better job basically at getting quality resources that work harder, smarter, you train them, they're happy at their job, they show up every day, and so you're more efficient. Clearly that sort of helps all of the different primary activities. And then general administration, think of that as the upper management of the company. Everybody here in primary activities their job is to be what we would call efficient. And so they do what it is that they're told to do, and they do it in the most efficient, cost-effective way that they can. It's the senior management that tells them, go do this. For whatever reason, we want our product to be this way, all of that. And so we call that effectiveness. And if the general administration does not give them the right directions, maybe does not understand what customers wants and tells them to make something that is not satisfying customer needs, then general administration can destroy value. If, on the other hand, general administration does a good job of understanding customer needs, communicating that to the primary activities, giving them the resources that they need to do all of that effectively, then clearly things work better. And so there are some companies that their primary competitive advantage is that their upper management is just so much better than everybody else's. Obviously, since you guys are all business majors, that's an area that might be of interest to you when you start exploring, how much value can a good manager create? Maybe the better way to answer that is how much value can a bad manager destroy? Second way of looking at this is what we call the resource-based view of value creation and competitive advantage. And it's really based on the idea that you have certain things. So rather than thinking about activities that you carry out, you think about things that you have, whether you've bought those or built them or invented them or trained them or whatever it is, but they are things that you have that are maybe different than the things that your competitors have, and that difference puts you at an advantage. So kind of let's go first and look over here to the right. It's in order for it to create an advantage and therefore be what's called a strategic resource, it needs to meet three criteria. First, it needs to be valuable. So it's not enough for you to have a thing. It has to be something that having it allows you to either make more or spend less or be more desirable to your customers or whatever else. And so it's got to be something that allows you to do something that your customers find valuable. It has to be scarce. If it's just something that's laying around on the street and you have it and everybody else has it, then there's no advantage there, and therefore no big deal. In addition to being scarce, it has to be something that you can't replace. The book talks about either imitations or substitutes. Think of either of those as examples of where you're saying, I may not have the exact thing that you have, but I don't need the exact thing that you have. I just need something that will do the same thing as what you have, and let me create a product that is similar to yours, and so that's no big deal. So ideally, then, what you want to focus on are those resources that are valuable, scarce, and equally importantly, there is no imitation or substitute that will do the job well. One of the things that often pops into mind for that, to kind of understand that, might be pharmaceutical companies. They have these formulas for how to create certain medicines and create them in a particular way, and they think, oh, those are our strategic resource. However, it's fairly easy for someone to reverse engineer a medicine once it's out on the market and understand how it was created. And by law, all they have to do is create something that they didn't follow the same steps, or it's a slightly different chemical combination, and that makes it okay for them to do it, even though to the customer they would look at it and say, I don't really care whether it's this or that. Quite frankly, they both have the same effect on me and they work equally as well. So you think about name brand versus generic drugs, that's an example of that. And so if they can be imitated or substituted with something that's kind of similar, then that's not really your strategic resource. Might say something about where money's being put in the pharmaceutical industry. Now, once in addition to just in general thinking in terms of that, you also have different categories of resources where you might find value. So we have tangible resources, intangible, and competencies. Tangible resource, think of that as something that is clearly defined. You can touch it, you can see it, whatever that is. One of those is money. If you've got more money than other people, that's clearly valuable. It's scarce, can't be replaced by anything else. Money is money. And so if you can afford to do things that they can't do, then that's an advantage for you. Some sort of physical resource, that can be, that you have rights to some minerals, plant and equipment that you've bought, real estate as an example, land that you own. If you have those things and they fit these criteria, then by definition you're basically saying that if those are things that are important in order for me to do what I do, and I have them and my competitors don't have as much of them, then that can create an advantage for me. Technical, usually that's like intellectual property or trade secrets. Again, I know that a lot of people think, well, I may not be able to see that or touch it, but we can conceptualize that pretty easily. And in the case of most of those, there's something somewhere written down. And so, they really are that. They really are tangible. And again, if you have them and other people don't, if they create value, if there's not something else that is not exactly that, but is close, that your competitors could get their hands on, so that doesn't exist, they either need this or they got nothing, then that's clearly an advantage. You got the intangible resources. Usually we think of that in terms of human qualities of, harder to measure, but do I have better employees than them? Do I have a better culture than them? Do I have a better social network and connections with the rest of the world than them? Those are things that we can conceptualize how they create value and how they're difficult. I mean, this is, a lot of people would point, for example, to Disney, which is a company I do a lot with, and basically say, the quality of their employees and the culture at that place is one of the things that really sets them apart from anybody else, their industry or any other industry, quite frankly, and that they have such a big gap in that, and they have some know-how for how to, really identify and develop good employees and have a positive culture, but that's just something we can't overcome. And yet it's so powerful that when they have guests or customers buy their products or go to their parks or whatever, that's the thing that they remember. Obviously, innovation or reputation, a company can just be good. It's not that they have a particular product, they're good at always coming up with something new. So if you've got the ability, whether that's an individual person or just the way that you kind of run your business, you seem to have developed a knack for always coming up with something new, and you do it better than everybody else, then that's going to be huge. Obviously, under Steve Jobs, Apple was a bit like that. Their ability to innovate was unparalleled. They probably lost some of that right now. Reputation. This is that we all talk about, that there are companies that have this incredible brand. And so that's an example of an intangible resource. Once you've established that, nobody can really steal your brand. They can tarnish it, but they can't steal it. And it's scarce, it can't be replaced. And if it's a good brand and people will, when they look at two things side by side on a shelf, they'll pick yours and maybe even be willing to pay more for it simply because of the brand that's on it, then clearly that's valuable. last of these categories are organizational competencies. And so, really, what you're talking about there, the resource-based view sort of subsumes or incorporates all of the value chain-based view here, where it basically says, look, if you've got some activity, and you can go look at the list of activities in the value chain that you do better than your competitors, then that's an organizational competency. And so the fact that you've figured out how to do it better than them is a resource, right? So each of those competencies could be a resource. So maybe that's a little bit of cheating, but there you go. Last thing I want to talk about as it relates to this is more specifically to the intellectual assets and the challenge of that. Again, when we think of intellectual assets, that may be a person, that may be a secret, that may be a way of doing things. There's lots of things that go into that. The book talks about, and I think it's a good point, that in today's age, that perhaps just somebody that is well connected in the industry or otherwise is an intellectual asset in that that they're able to tap into a broad network that without them you couldn't tap into. Well, the challenge is basically this. So here you are as a firm, and inside of that firm you've got intellectual assets, and some of them you've clearly identified, and some of them you may not even notice and know that they're there and that they're creating value. So that's the first challenge, is how do I know which of my, where all my intellectual assets are and what they are and how they're creating value. And that's a challenge for a lot of companies. The next big challenge is that what companies want to do is create an environment that attracts more intellectual assets into the company, right? They want smart people to want to come to work for them and innovate and help them get better. And if they're successful at doing that, they believe they'll be more profitable. And so they want to do things that will attract smart people to want to be inside their company. And at the same time, they need to do things to protect the assets that they have and make sure that they don't leave the company because that could harm the value of the company. And this is where the real challenge comes from. Imagine that you are in a company and you need to hire the best and the brightest on the one hand, but on the other hand, you need to protect all of the assets that you have. So, when you're recruiting people, you're basically talking to them about, we want you to come in here. It's a great place to work. Your innovations will really be appreciated, yada, yada, yada. But once they're in, then you sort of have to put the clamps on them and say, great, you now work for us. Anything you do belongs to us. You can't leave. You can't tell anybody about what you're doing. So that's a problem by itself. It's sort of a different sides of the coin. And so how do companies sort of address this issue? Well, it really comes down to, the way I look at it is there's different ways that you can try and protect and keep your intellectual assets safe, but you have to think about when you do those, what that does in terms of being able to attract new intellectual assets. So the one that most people come up with is, well, I'll have them as soon as they come in sign a non-disclosure, non-compete that basically is anything that you do here we own, and that's it. Well, that sounds like a nice legal approach, but if you're somebody new, right, you're a bright kid that's figured out some neat things, and a company basically says, we really want to hire you, but by the way, what our non-disclosure, non-compete basically says is anything you figure out belongs to us. If you ever leave the company, you can't take what you know and use it someplace else for maybe several years. You can't tell them what you know and sell that information to them. You can't do anything. And so the thing that makes you valuable to us is the thing that will not let you do if you ever leave our company. And so right there, they're basically putting you in a situation where you have to choose us or them. And a lot of bright people will basically not sign that. And so it will scare people away from the company. Second thing that some companies basically say is no problem if it leaves. We'll just do a better job of attracting and developing our intellectual assets inside. And so that's where we're going to put our spin on. Sounds good in theory. Simple question. How are you going to do that, right? And if you could do that, why aren't you already doing it? I mean, why wouldn't you do it anyway, regardless of whether or not you had this worry about the intellectual assets? Now, at the same time, it really doesn't address the problem, because as you're creating more of these and developing more of these, you are potentially pushing others out, because they're being replaced by the new ones. And as you push them out, they're going to leave your firm, and so you don't have any NDAs or any of that sort of stuff, and so they're going to leave your firm and go someplace else. So it doesn't really solve your problem. Other possibilities, there are folks that basically say, what we need to do is just have a culture that causes people to want to stay. And again, sounds really good in practice. We're all on the same team. We really appreciate you. We're going to find a home, for what you do, and we're going to reward you for it. All that sort of stuff makes people want to come, makes people want to stay. But at the end of the day, you still have this issue of, well, what about the asset that maybe wasn't an asset when they got there but is now? Are they underappreciated? They might leave. And also, at some point, a competitor could potentially offer such a sweet deal that somebody will leave. So, the debate here and the issue is, maybe there's no one size fits all way to solve this problem. And you might try different sorts of things. It maybe is on more of a case by case basis, but you may also simply have to acknowledge the fact that intellectual assets, building a business based solely on intellectual assets, and a competitive advantage based on that, is sort of a risky play, simply because of everything. They are the one thing that you can't really lock down and protect. So you may not have a choice. There are some industries where your entire competitive advantage is your intellectual assets. You think of the gaming industry and programmers. You think of consulting industries and the experts that they have. I mean, if they don't have that to sell, what do they have to sell? So there are some industries where you really can't do anything else about it. You just have to acknowledge that. But that's the challenge, is basically building competitive advantage on top of relying on intellectual assets. Anyway, so that's sort of hits the high points of some of the competitive advantage type approaches and challenges, and hopefully that's useful to you.